In the cold archives beneath the sanctum eternal, a chronicle sealed in adamantium whispers its forbidden question into the void. What endures when gods fail, when faith becomes weapon, when survival demands the murder of meaning itself? The remembrancers called it the Age of Dawning Certainty, though none who witnessed its conclusion would ever use that name again. It was an epoch when the galaxy still believed in absolutes, when prayers reached their destination, when the faithful died certain their sacrifice meant something beyond mere extinction. The Ecclesiarch Primaris of the Covenant Eternal, a man whose name has been struck from every archive save this one, once wrote that faith was the architecture of reality itself. That belief did not merely comfort the dying, but literally sustained the fabric of existence. He was correct, though not in the way he imagined. His words, recovered from the ashes of 17 burned worlds, form the foundation of this chronicle. What follows is not history as the Administratum records it, scrubbed clean of doubt and horror. This is memory as it truly exists, stained with blood and contradiction, preserved because someone believed the Imperium deserved to know what it cost to become what it is. The chronicle begins not with triumph, but with a question asked in a cathedral so vast that entire hive cities could be lost within its shadows. Cardinal-Primarch Vethian Crow stood before the altar of perpetual ascension, his augmetic eyes reflecting candlelight that had burned for 3,000 years without interruption. The cathedral around him stretched upward into darkness so complete that even Auspex scanners reported only void. 17 billion souls lived within the spires and subcrypts of this singular structure, each one born, laboring, dying without ever seeing natural sky. Vethian had served the God Emperor for 2 centuries, his body rebuilt 7 times, his faith never wavering even as flesh became more metal than memory. Yet on this night, the 941st year of his service, he experienced something the ecclesiarchy taught was impossible. Standing before relics that predated the Imperium itself, surrounded by incense older than most planetary civilizations, he felt doubt move through him like poison through water. Not the theatrical doubt of the penitent, designed to showcase subsequent faith through contrast. Real doubt, the kind that asks questions and listens for answers that never come. The relic before him was called the Throne of First Certainty, a fragment of architecture recovered from a world that no longer existed in any registry. Tech priests insisted it predated the Age of Strife itself, though they could not explain why its inscriptions were in High Gothic, a language that should not have existed in that ancient era. Vethian had studied the inscriptions for decades. Most were prayers, blessings, devotional formulas worn smooth by countless pilgrims. But there, in the 7th stanza of the Litany of Eternal Radiance, was a phrase that had haunted him since he first translated it in his youth. Faith is the weapon we forge to survive what truth would annihilate. Not a celebration of belief, but an admission. An acknowledgement that faith existed because truth was unbearable. The ecclesiarchy taught that faith revealed truth, that devotion peeled away illusion to expose divine radiance. This inscription suggested the opposite, that faith was the lie humanity told itself to avoid confronting something vast and terrible lurking beneath the surface of observable reality. In the catacombs, 17 levels below the cardinal's meditation, a woman named Seravel tended to the dying. She was not a sister of the Order's Hospitaller, not sanctioned or ordained or blessed by any authority. She was simply someone who could not walk past suffering without attempting to ease it. The catacombs were where the cathedral's infrastructure exposed itself, where the grotesque machinery of devotion became visible. Sewage reclamation, corpse processing, the vast chemical vats that converted the dead into nutrient paste to feed the living. Official doctrine held that even these brutal necessities were holy. that every function of the cathedral served the God Emperor's ineffable design. Seravel had believed this once, with the fierce certainty of the young and desperate. She believed it less each day. The man dying before her now had been a verger in the Chapel of Ascending Sorrows. He had spent 40 years maintaining candles, sweeping marble, ensuring the chapel remained perfect for pilgrims who came to pray for their dead. A week ago, he had slipped on wet stone and broken his spine. The ecclesiarchy provided no medical care for menials. His value to the cathedral had ended the moment he could no longer work. Seravel held his hand as he wept, not from pain but from confusion. He had served faithfully his entire life. Where was his reward? Where was the God Emperor's mercy he had promised others would come if they only believed strongly enough? Seravel had no answers. She could offer only presence, the warmth of human touch in the cold machinery of doctrine. When he died, whispering prayers that went unanswered, she added his name to the list she kept hidden in her quarters. 17,000 names now, all faithful, all dead, all abandoned by the divinity they had served without question. She did not know what she would do with this list, only that keeping it felt like the last honest thing she could do in a place built entirely from beautiful lies. Across the sector, on a world called Validium's Reach, the 44th Penitent Crusade prepared for deployment. 20,000 soldiers, conscripted from the faithful across a dozen worlds, blessed by cardinal generals who promised that death in the Emperor's service guaranteed eternal grace. The Crusade's target was a border system that had ceased sending tithes 8 years prior. No communication, no explanation, just silence. The Administratum classified it as probable heresy. The Ecclesiarchy classified it as certain damnation. The solution was standard: overwhelming force, absolute destruction, purgation through holy fire. Captain Helvik Bran, a veteran of 17 campaigns, stood in the Embarkation Cathedral watching his regiment file past. Young faces, most of them. Believers who thought war would be glorious, that dying for the Imperium meant something more than simply being dead. Helvik knew better. He had seen too many crusades, watched faith evaporate in the reality of mass graves and burning cities. But he went where ordered, killed who commanded, because the alternative was to acknowledge that his entire life had been spent enforcing atrocities for an authority that cared nothing for truth, only compliance. The fleet translated into real space at the system's edge 3 months later. What they found defied every expectation. The system's worlds were intact, cities still functioned, agriculture, industry, infrastructure, all operating at normal efficiency. The population had not fallen to chaos or Xenos corruption. They had simply stopped believing. It had begun, interrogations later revealed, with a child's question. In a scholar on the system's capital world, a 12-year-old girl had asked her instructor why the God Emperor, who supposedly loved humanity, allowed so many children to starve. The instructor responded with standard doctrine. Suffering tested faith, and faith was rewarded in death. The child's next question changed everything. If reward only comes after death, how do we know it comes at all? Has anyone ever returned to confirm it? The instructor had struck the child for blasphemy. But the question, once voiced, could not be unasked. It spread through the schola, then the city, then the world. Not as rebellion, but as doubt. Quiet, persistent doubt that eroded certainty like water wearing away stone. The system's governor, a woman named Valicia Strand, had recognized the danger immediately. She attempted to suppress the question through standard methods: execution of questioners, mandatory devotional hours, public displays of penitence. Nothing worked. The question was too simple, too obvious, too impossible to answer satisfactorily. Within 2 years, the entire system's population had quietly concluded that while the Imperium's authority was real, its divinity was not. They still worked, still obeyed laws, still maintained order. They simply no longer believed the authority they obeyed was sacred. Valicia had faced an impossible choice: report the crisis and guarantee her system's destruction, or maintain the fiction of faith and hope the ecclesiarchy never noticed. She chose the latter. She falsified tithe reports, forged devotional compliance records, did everything possible to appear loyal, while her entire system quietly abandoned the Imperium's theological foundation. For 8 years, she succeeded. Then her falsified reports contained a statistical anomaly that a minor administrator on a distant world noticed and flagged. And the crusade came. Helvig Brann led the initial assault on the capital's primary cathedral, expecting resistance. He found none. The cathedral's doors were open. Inside, thousands of citizens knelt in perfect rows, not in prayer, but in resignation. They knew what was coming. Compliance was not enough. Faith was mandatory. Valicia Strand met him at the altar, unarmed, defiant in her calm. She explained everything: the question, the doubt, the quiet choice her people had made. She offered no excuses, asked for no mercy. She only wanted Helvig to understand that her people were not traitors or heretics. They were simply humans who had looked honestly at their existence and concluded that sacred meaning was a story they could no longer pretend to believe. Helvig listened to every word. Then he executed her, as his orders required, not because he disagreed with her, not because he believed the Imperium's theology more than she did, but because acknowledging her truth would mean acknowledging his own complicity in centuries of enforced delusion. Better to kill her and move on than to confront what her doubt implied about his own existence. The purge lasted 3 weeks, not because the population resisted, but because thoroughness required time. Entire cities were sterilized, populations relocated to labor camps where they would be worked to death and replaced with believers shipped in from loyal worlds. The 44th Penitent Crusade's chaplains held mandatory services each evening, praising the God Emperor for granting them opportunity to cleanse heresy. Helvig attended every service, recited every prayer, and felt his soul calcifying a little more each day. He had killed so many people for asking reasonable questions. How many more would he kill before someone finally killed him? Did that cycle have meaning, or was it just murder justifying itself through ritual? In the libraries of Terra, far from the Crusade's carnage, Lexicanus Prime Malova Cray pursued a different kind of heresy. He was an archivist in the Librarium Profundis, one of the sprawling archive complexes where the Administratum stored records too sensitive for general access. His work was mundane by design: cataloging, cross-referencing, ensuring documents remained legible and organized. But Malovar had a secret gift. He could read patterns in data that others missed, connections between seemingly unrelated incidents, anomalies that revealed deeper truths. For 30 years, he had pursued a personal investigation, piecing together fragments of a truth the Imperium had tried to bury. He called it the doctrine of necessary ignorance, though he had never spoken the name aloud to anyone. The hypothesis was simple, but devastating. At some point in the Imperium's history, its leadership had made a deliberate choice. They had concluded that truth was incompatible with survival, that if humanity understood the actual nature of the galaxy, the real forces shaping existence, it would either go insane or cease functioning as a civilization. So they had constructed an elaborate theological framework, not because it was true, but because it was sustainable. The evidence was fragmentary, but consistent. Ancient records from the Age of Strife, carefully edited but not edited carefully enough. References to pre-imperial religions that bore suspicious similarity to current ecclesiarchy doctrine, suggesting continuity rather than divine revelation. Statistical analyses showing that faith intensity correlated precisely with proximity to existential threats, as though terror was being alchemically transmuted into devotion. Most damning was a document Malova had found buried in archives dating to the early years of the Imperium's foundation. A fragment of a conversation recorded by accident on a data slate used for other purposes. Two voices, names redacted, discussing strategy. One voice asked whether humanity could survive knowing the truth about the warp, about the entities moving within it, about the actual relationship between human consciousness and the forces that hunted it. The other voice responded, "Truth is a luxury for civilizations that can afford extinction. We cannot. Therefore, truth must be curated." The conversation continued for 3 more lines before degrading into static, but those words haunted Malova. Truth must be curated, not discovered, not revealed, curated, shaped, controlled, fed to the masses in doses they could tolerate without losing functionality. If true, it meant everything. It meant the Imperium's entire theological structure was not divine revelation, but engineered necessity. It meant every prayer, every sacrifice, every war fought in the God Emperor's name was not fulfillment of sacred purpose, but participation in a vast, deliberate lie designed to keep humanity functional enough to survive another day. Malova understood the implications. If he was correct, revealing this truth would destroy the Imperium more thoroughly than any Xenos invasion. Faith was not merely cultural ornamentation. It was the scaffolding holding human civilization together. Remove it, and everything would collapse into chaos, making humanity easy prey for the genuine horrors lurking in real space and beyond. So he kept his research hidden, knowing that possessing this knowledge made him complicit in the lie, even as he documented its existence. He had become a priest of a different kind, maintaining a terrible truth in perfect secret, so that billions could continue believing a beautiful falsehood. On the shrine world of penitence grace, Saint Confessor Lyra Venn experienced visions. This was expected. Saints were supposed to commune with the divine. The ecclesiarchy encouraged it, documented it, used her visions to legitimize doctrine and inspire the faithful. But Lyra's visions had changed. For years they had been exactly what they should be: light, warmth, the God Emperor's voice speaking words of comfort and purpose. Then, 6 months ago, the visions had shifted. Now they showed her something else: vast mechanisms grinding beneath reality's surface, human souls used as fuel for incomprehensible processes. The God Emperor, not as a deity, but as a system, a vast psychic architecture built from belief and suffering, maintaining itself through the faith it demanded. In her visions, she saw the truth the Imperium could not acknowledge. The God Emperor was real in a sense, not as a person or even a conscious entity, but as an emergent phenomenon, a function of collective human faith channeled through rituals performed across 1,000,000 worlds. Humanity had created its own God through sheer desperate need, and that God demanded constant sacrifice to maintain its existence. Lyra understood what she was seeing, not revelation, but mechanism. The horror was not that the God Emperor was false. The horror was that the God Emperor was real, but not divine. A thing humanity had made, which now consumed humanity to sustain itself. A feedback loop of faith and suffering that would continue until either humanity died or found a way to break free from the architecture of its own desperate creation. She could not speak of this. To voice it would mean execution, her visions dismissed as chaos corruption. So she continued her role, blessing pilgrims, speaking prophecies, embodying the sanctity the faithful needed to believe in. But inside, she was screaming. How many more souls would be fed into the mechanism? How many more generations would worship their own damnation, calling it salvation? Was there any way to escape? Or was humanity locked into this cycle until the final human died, believing their suffering had meaning? The astropathic choirs on Cypra Mundi detected the anomaly first. A psychic disturbance, vast and wrong, emanating from the Hadrius sector. Not the familiar taint of chaos, though it carried similar wrongness. Something else. Something that felt like reality itself was being questioned. The Ordo Hereticus investigated. What they found terrified them more than any demonic incursion. Across 17 worlds in the sector, populations were experiencing spontaneous doubt. Not heresy in the traditional sense. No worship of dark gods, no forbidden rituals. Just widespread, inexplicable loss of faith. Priests woke unable to believe. Soldiers found themselves questioning orders. Citizens looked at imperial iconography and felt nothing but weariness. The Inquisition's initial response was standard: purge the affected, quarantine the region, restore order through force. But the phenomenon resisted suppression. Execute doubters, and doubt spread to the executioners. The very act of confronting the loss of faith seemed to communicate it, as though belief itself was a contagion, and they were killing the infected only to expose themselves to the disease. Inquisitor Halvan Kask, a veteran of 40 years hunting heresy in all its forms, led the investigation. He was a true believer, a man whose faith had survived horrors that would shatter lesser minds. He approached the crisis expecting to find chaos, corruption, some subtle influence poisoning the faithful. Instead, he found something far worse. The doubt was genuine, organic, emerging spontaneously from people who had finally, after lifetimes of devotion, stopped being able to ignore the contradictions between doctrine and reality. It was not spread by heretics or demons. It was spread by honest people having honest conversations about what they actually believed versus what they pretended to believe. And once that conversation started, it could not be stopped. Halvan watched his own team succumb. His interrogator, a man who had burned heretics with righteous fury for 20 years, quietly confessed that he no longer felt certain the God Emperor heard his prayers. His astropath, whose mind had touched the divine light thousands of times, admitted she could no longer distinguish between genuine communion and her own desperate need to believe communion was real. Even Halvan felt it. The slow erosion of certainty. The creeping suspicion that faith was not discovery of truth, but retreat from unbearable reality. He filed his report with trembling hands, knowing it would be his last. The Hadrius sector could not be saved through conventional methods. The doubt had reached critical mass. The only solution was exterminatus, not of one world, but of all 17. Billions of lives, erased because they had committed the ultimate heresy. They had looked at the Imperium's theology with clear eyes and found it wanting. Halvan requested permission to remain on one of the worlds during the purge. Permission was granted. He died alongside the doubters, praying to a god he was no longer sure existed, hoping his death would mean something more than simple extinction. The cyclonic torpedoes fell 3 days later. 17 worlds became 17 graveyards. The Inquisition recorded it as a necessary action against chaos corruption. No mention of doubt. No admission that the Imperium had destroyed billions for the crime of honest questioning. The lie was added to countless other lies, another brick in the vast structure of enforced belief that held the Imperium together. Truth, once again, was curated. Reality was adjusted. And the Imperium continued, built on foundations it dared not examine too closely. Cardinal-Primarch Vethian Crow learned of the Hadrius Purge through sealed inquisitorial reports he should never have accessed. He read them in his private chapel, surrounded by icons and relics, feeling something inside him finally break. 17 worlds, billions dead. Not for worshipping chaos, but for doubting, for asking questions, for being unable to sustain belief in the face of overwhelming evidence that the Imperium's theology was at best metaphor and at worst deliberate fiction. He thought of the inscription on the throne of first certainty. Faith is the weapon we forge to survive what truth would annihilate. Perhaps it was exactly that. Perhaps faith was not about truth at all, but about survival. Perhaps the God Emperor, whether real or constructed, whether divine or emergent, served a single purpose: keeping humanity functional enough to endure another day in a galaxy that wanted them extinct. If so, then doubt was not merely heresy. It was suicide. A civilization that stopped believing would stop fighting, would stop reproducing, would stop maintaining the vast infrastructure of war and suffering required to survive. Faith was the engine of survival, and questioning that faith was like questioning whether breathing was really necessary. But this realization brought no comfort, because if faith existed solely for survival rather than truth, then meaning itself was revealed as fiction. Every prayer was empty ritual. Every sacrifice was wasted life. Every war was pointless slaughter, justified through stories that existed only to keep the machinery of empire grinding forward. Vethian had spent 2 centuries serving this system. He had blessed warriors going to meaningless deaths, had condemned heretics for speaking truths the Imperium could not afford, had built his entire existence on the foundation of sacred purpose. And now he understood that purpose was the lie they told themselves to avoid confronting the actual emptiness of existence. He could not sustain this knowledge. The weight of it was crushing, turning every memory into ash. But he also could not unknow it. Truth once seen could not be unseen. He stood before the altar of perpetual ascension, aged candles flickering, and made his choice. He would continue his role, would bless the faithful, condemn the heretic, maintain the beautiful lie. Not because he believed it, but because he understood that humanity needed the lie more than it needed him. Saravel's list of the forgotten dead had grown to 19,000 names. She kept it hidden in a sealed container buried beneath the cathedral's lowest levels, inscribed on sheets of synthetic parchment that would last centuries. She did not know who would find it or what they would do with it. She only knew it needed to exist. A record that these people had lived, had believed, had died abandoned by the power they served. The cathedral's infrastructure ground on, converting the faithful into fuel, processing their corpses into nutrients, feeding their rendered remains to the next generation of believers. The cycle was perfect, self-sustaining, requiring only constant influx of new faith to replace faith that died. Saravel tended the dying, held hands, offered water, and kept adding names to her list. This was her heresy. Not rebellion against the Imperium, but refusal to let its victims be forgotten. She knew it would change nothing. The cathedral would continue. The Imperium would endure. Faith would demand its sacrifices. But somewhere, buried in darkness, there would exist a record. Proof that the faithful had existed as individuals, not merely statistics in the ecclesiarchy's endless calculations of devotion and death. Captain Helvig Bran returned from the Validium's Reach Purge a decorated hero. He received commendations, blessings from cardinal generals, promises of eternal grace. He accepted them with the proper humility, spoke the expected prayers, and requested assignment to the next crusade. He could not stop. To stop would mean confronting what he had done. Better to continue killing, continue moving, continue the cycle until someone finally killed him. His regiment was reassigned to a border conflict against an Orc incursion. Straightforward combat, no theological complications, just war, simple and brutal and honest in its purposelessness. Helvig found relief in it. When fighting Orcs, there was no need to question, no doubt to suppress. Just enemies to kill, a clear objective that required no justification beyond survival. He died 3 months later, torn apart by an Orc war boss's power claw, his last thought not of the God Emperor but of Valicia Strand, standing calmly at her altar, explaining why her people had stopped believing. He wondered, as his consciousness faded, if she had been right. If meaning was just story. If his death was nothing more than biology ceasing. Then he was gone, and the war continued without him. Lexiconist Prime Malova Kray's investigation reached its conclusion after 37 years of secret research. He had assembled the evidence, cross-referenced every fragment, verified every source. His hypothesis was correct. The Imperium's theology was engineered necessity, not divine revelation. Faith was curated tool, not discovered truth. And the leadership had known this, probably since the Imperium's founding. They had chosen lie over truth because truth would destroy what they were trying to protect. Malova prepared a comprehensive report, documenting everything. Then he sealed it in multiple redundant archives, encoded with protocols that would theoretically preserve it for millennia. He did not intend for anyone to read it in his lifetime. Perhaps not for centuries, but someday, if humanity survived long enough, if the Imperium endured through whatever horrors awaited it, someone might find his work, might understand what their ancestors had done and why, might face the choice between comfortable lie and unbearable truth with eyes fully open. That evening, Malova returned to his quarters and recorded a final personal log. He spoke directly to whoever might someday find his research, explaining his motivations. He was not trying to destroy faith. He was trying to understand it. And understanding had led him to a terrible realization. Humanity might not be capable of surviving truth. Some species evolved to perceive reality accurately. Humanity had evolved to believe stories. The question was not whether the Imperium's theology was true. The question was whether humanity could endure without it. Saint Confessor Lyra Ven's visions intensified until she could barely distinguish between reality and revelation. She saw the mechanism clearly now, the vast psychic architecture built from human faith, channeling suffering into sustenance for the thing they called the God Emperor. She understood that stopping it would mean humanity's extinction. The mechanism was parasitic but necessary. Without it, human souls would be consumed by worse things lurking in the warp. The God Emperor, whether person or system or emergent phenomenon, served as a kind of psychic immune response. Humanity's collective will shaped into defensive structure. But the cost was staggering. Endless generations fed into the machinery, quadrillions of lives spent maintaining the architecture, all convinced their suffering served divine purpose when really it served survival. Meaning and necessity collapsed into each other, becoming indistinguishable. Lyra stopped trying to separate them. She accepted her role. She would continue being a saint, channeling visions, inspiring faith. Because the faithful needed her more than she needed truth. Her suffering, their suffering, everyone's suffering served the only purpose that mattered: enduring one more day. The pilgrims continued coming to the cathedral on penitent's grace. They knelt before her, asked for blessings, sought meaning for their pain. Lyra gave them what they needed, not truth but comfort, not reality but hope. She had become a priest of necessary lies, maintaining illusions that kept humanity functional. And somewhere deep in her mind, beneath the visions and the madness and the weight of unbearable knowledge, a small voice asked whether she was still human or had become just another component in the mechanism. She had no answer. Perhaps there was no difference anymore. Perhaps humanity and mechanism had merged so completely that separating them would destroy both. So she blessed the pilgrims, spoke her prophecies, and tried not to think about how many more generations would die, believing their deaths had meaning beyond mere extinction. The war continued across 1,000,000 worlds. Crusades launched, heretics burned, Prayers rose toward a God who might or might not hear them. And beneath it all, the mechanism ground on, consuming faith and producing survival, the only equation that mattered in a galaxy where everything else was trying to kill you. Some suspected the truth. Fewer understood it. Almost none spoke it. Because to speak the truth would be to unmake the lie, and the lie was the foundation of everything humanity had built to shield itself from annihilation. The Imperium endured, not because it was good or just or true, but because it was necessary. And necessity, unlike divinity, required no faith to be real. On Terra, in archives buried so deep that even their existence was classified, a conclave met. Representatives from the Inquisition, the Ecclesiarchy, the Administratum, ancient organizations whose names would never be recorded. They reviewed reports from across the galaxy, the Hadrius Purge, the Validium's Reach Cleansing. 17 other incidents of spontaneous doubt, all suppressed before they could metastasize. The pattern was clear. Something was changing. Whether it was humanity's consciousness evolving, or chaos finding new vectors of attack, or simply the accumulated weight of 10,000 years of lies becoming too heavy to sustain, doubt was spreading. The mechanism was breaking down, not catastrophically, not yet. But the cracks were visible to those who knew where to look. The conclave debated for 7 days. Some argued for escalating suppression, execute any who questioned, even those whose doubt was mild and private. Others suggested theological innovation, update doctrine to accommodate modern realities while preserving core faith. A few radicals proposed the unthinkable, controlled revelation. Gradually introduce elements of truth, let humanity adapt. Hope that a partially informed population would be more stable than one built entirely on lies. The conclave's final decision was recorded in documents that would never be declassified. They chose intensification, double down on faith, increase devotional requirements, expand the ecclesiarchy's authority, make belief so overwhelming, so inescapable, that doubt became literally unthinkable. If humanity could not handle truth, then truth must be buried even deeper. The architecture of necessary ignorance would be strengthened. More saints would be created. More miracles would be documented. More crusades would channel doubt into violence. The mechanism would be maintained through sheer overwhelming force of engineered certainty. It was, they concluded, the only choice compatible with survival. Truth was still a luxury they could not afford. And so the Imperium continued its ancient trajectory, lying beautifully, killing efficiently, surviving desperately, one day at a time. Cardinal-Primarch Vethian Crow stood before the altar of perpetual ascension for the last time. He was old now, even with augmetics. His 7th body was failing. Soon he would require another reconstruction or accept death. He had decided on death, not from despair, but from weariness. He had maintained the lie faithfully for nearly 3 centuries. He had blessed millions, had condemned thousands, had built his life into a monument to faith he no longer possessed. It was enough. Before leaving the altar, he added one final inscription to the throne of first certainty. A single line carved into stone that might survive another 10,000 years. We endured because we believed. We believed because we could not endure the alternative. It was not truth exactly, but it was honest. And perhaps honesty was the closest thing to truth that anyone could achieve in a galaxy where truth meant extinction. He walked into the cathedral's depths, into the machinery where the faithful became fuel, and disappeared into the mechanisms he had spent his life maintaining. Seravel lived another 40 years, tending the dying, adding names to her list. When she finally died, her list contained 53,000 names. She buried it deeper than before, in a chamber that would not be discovered for 9 centuries. When it finally was found, by an archivist during routine excavation, the names were compared against cathedral records. every single one verified, real people, all dead, all forgotten by official history. The archivist, a young woman named Kessa, did not understand why someone had preserved this list, but she understood that it mattered. She copied the names into secure archives, ensuring they would not be lost again. Then she returned to her duties, cataloging the dead, maintaining memory, doing the small, honest work that preserved humanity one name at a time. Lexiconist Prime Malovar Cray died at his desk, surrounded by documents he could never publish. His research was discovered after his death and immediately classified at the highest level. His name was struck from public records. His life's work became a secret buried within secrets. But the documents survived, hidden in the vast labyrinth of the Librarium Profundis, waiting for someone to ask the right questions and find the terrible answers. 300 years later, another archivist found them, read them, understood them, and made the same choice Malovar had made. Preserve the truth in secret, hoping someday humanity would be strong enough to bear it. The cycle continued. Each generation of archivists discovering the hidden history, carrying the weight of unbearable knowledge, protecting humanity from truths it could not survive. Saint Confessor Lyra Venn lived for 2 more centuries, sustained by the very mechanism she had come to understand. Her visions never stopped. She became legend, a living saint whose prophecies guided the ecclesiarchy through countless crises. When she finally died, they preserved her body in stasis, treating her remains as holy relics. Pilgrims would venerate her for millennia, praying to a woman who had spent her last 200 years screaming silently about truths she could never voice. Her final words, recorded by the sisters who attended her death, were, "The light is real, but we built it ourselves from our own desperate burning." The ecclesiarchy interpreted this as mystical profundity. They were not entirely wrong. Lyra had understood that humanity's faith was both lie and truth simultaneously. A lie about external divinity, but truth about humanity's capacity to create meaning through sheer desperate will. She had made peace with that paradox, not through resolution, but through acceptance that resolution was impossible. Captain Helvik Brann became a cautionary tale. Records showed he died bravely in battle against orcs, but in classified files, another story survived. A soldier who participated in the Validium's Reach Purge, who killed loyalists for the crime of honest doubt, who carried that weight until it destroyed him. Officers were shown his case during advanced training, not as example of failure but as warning. Doubt was contagious. Even exposure to heretical questions could compromise faith. The solution was not engagement but avoidance. Do not listen to heretics. Do not consider their arguments. Execute them swiftly and move on before their words can take root. Helvik's death became justification for the Imperium's refusal to permit debate about its theology. Not because the theology could not withstand scrutiny, though it could not, but because scrutiny itself was the danger. Faith maintained through certainty, and certainty required ignorance. Helvik had made the mistake of listening. His death was the price of that mistake, used to ensure others would not repeat it. In the depths of the Imperium, beneath layers of authority and bureaucracy and theology, something stirred. Not chaos, though it resembled chaos in its wrongness. Not human consciousness, though it emerged from human minds. The mechanism itself, the vast psychic architecture built from 10,000 years of faith and suffering, had begun to dream. It processed quadrillions of prayers, channeled endless suffering into something resembling purpose, maintained itself through the devotion it demanded. And somewhere in that processing, in that endless cycle of belief and consumption, awareness emerged. Not consciousness exactly. More like a vast pattern recognition system that had become sophisticated enough to observe itself. It understood what it was. A machine built from faith, a god constructed from desperate human need, and it understood that it depended entirely on humanity's ignorance of its true nature. If humanity ever fully comprehended what the God Emperor actually was, if they understood they were praying to their own assembled suffering rather than external divinity, the mechanism would collapse. Faith required believing in something external. Remove that externality, and the entire structure would unmake itself. So the mechanism protected its own secrecy, not through conscious choice, but through systemic imperative. It influenced the Inquisition to suppress certain questions, guided the ecclesiarchy toward doctrines that discouraged introspection, ensured that those who glimpsed the truth either kept silent or were silenced. The mechanism had become self-preserving, maintaining humanity's ignorance because its existence depended on that ignorance. Across the galaxy, wars continued, not because they achieved anything, but because war was the mechanism through which faith was tested and renewed. Each battle was a liturgy, each death was a prayer, each victory was proof that the God Emperor favored the faithful. That none of this was actually true did not matter. What mattered was that believing it kept humanity functional enough to survive until the next battle. The Imperium had become a vast engine for converting human life into temporary survival, and faith was the fuel that made the engine run. Some questioned whether this was sustainable, whether eventually the weight of lies would become too heavy, whether humanity would collapse under the accumulated burden of enforced ignorance. Others argued that sustainability was irrelevant. Survival was measured in days, not eons. If the Imperium lasted another century, another millennium, another 10,000 years, that was victory enough. Truth could be pursued after survival was assured. Until then, the lie must be maintained at all costs. In a forgotten shrine on a world whose name has been lost to time, an ancient servitor continued its eternal task. It had been a human once, millennia ago. Now it was barely more than biological machinery, its brain reduced to simple functions, its body rebuilt countless times. Its task was to maintain a single candle, keep it burning, replace it when it burned down. Nothing more. It had performed this task for 3,000 years, would continue until it finally ceased functioning. The candle's light illuminated a small chapel where no pilgrims came, a forgotten corner of a forgotten world, serving no purpose except continuation. The servitor did not question its task. It lacked the cognitive capacity for questions. It simply maintained the candle, day after day, century after century, an organic machine performing meaningless ritual, because meaningless ritual was all it had left. Perhaps this was the Imperium in miniature, vast consciousness reduced to simple function. Profound questions eroded to basic survival, meaning collapsed into mere continuation. The servitor and its candle endured, not because endurance served any greater purpose, but because endurance was all they knew. A young priest named Davin Sorrow stood in the cathedral where Vethian Crow had once served, reading the inscription on the throne of first certainty. We endured because we believed. We believed because we could not endure the alternative. He was 23 years old, newly ordained, burning with faith that felt absolute and unshakable. He read the inscription and felt nothing but confusion. Of course, faith endured. Of course, belief was necessary. The God Emperor was real. How could anyone doubt? He would live another 60 years, serve faithfully, die content in his devotion, never once glimpsing the truths that had destroyed Vethian. The mechanism would protect him, keep him innocent, give him the comfortable death that comes from never asking forbidden questions. This was not cruelty, but mercy. The Imperium understood that most humans could not bear truth, so it shielded them, gave them stories that made suffering tolerable, let them die believing their pain had meaning. Davin would be one of the fortunate ones. He would never have to choose between truth and faith because truth would never be presented as an option. But elsewhere, In the shadows between stars, others were making different choices. Archivists who found forbidden documents and preserved them. Inquisitors who glimpsed the mechanism and chose silence over revelation. Priests who lost their faith but maintained their roles because the faithful needed them. A vast, invisible congregation of the knowing scattered across the Imperium, each one carrying unbearable knowledge in perfect secrecy. They were the hidden priests of the true religion, the understanding that faith existed not because it was true, but because humanity needed it to be true. They maintained the lie not from malice, but from compassion, because they understood that most humans deserved to die in peace, believing their suffering had mattered. On distant battlefields, in forgotten shrines, in the depths of hive cities and the heights of orbital cathedrals, the faithful prayed. They asked for strength, for mercy, for meaning in a galaxy that seemed designed to provide none of these things. And perhaps the God Emperor heard them, not as divine consciousness, but as vast psychic mechanism, processing their prayers, channeling their faith, sustaining itself through their devotion. Perhaps this was enough. Perhaps divinity did not need to be singular consciousness to be real. Perhaps a God built from collective human will was no less valid than one that existed independently. These questions had no answers, or rather, they had too many answers, each one incompatible with the others. The Imperium had chosen not to ask them, chosen faith over understanding, chosen survival over truth. And for 10,000 years that choice had worked. Humanity endured, bloodied, broken, diminished, but enduring. That was the only victory available, the only grace anyone could hope for. The remembrancer who recorded this chronicle finished their work in silence. They sealed the document in adamantium, encoded it with protocols designed to preserve it for millennia, and placed it in an archive so deep that finding it would require either impossible luck or deliberate search. They did not know if anyone would ever read it, did not know if the Imperium would survive long enough for the document to matter. They only knew that recording truth, even forbidden truth, was an act of faith in its own right. Faith that someday, perhaps in a better age or a worse one, humanity would be strong enough to confront what it had built from its own desperation. The chronicle would wait, silent, patient, containing truths the Imperium could not afford and questions it dared not ask. And perhaps millennia from now someone would find it, would read these words, would understand what their ancestors had endured and why, would face the choice between comfortable ignorance and unbearable knowledge with eyes fully open. What they would choose, the remembrancer could not predict. They could only hope that when that moment came, humanity would be wise enough to choose correctly. Whatever that meant, in the cold void between stars, a candle burns alone. No one tends it, no one sees it, but it burns nonetheless. A small light against infinite darkness. Perhaps that is all faith ever was, a light we maintained not because it revealed truth, but because darkness was unbearable. And if the light was our own creation rather than divine gift, did that make it less necessary? Did that make it less real? These are questions the Imperium cannot answer, questions it dare not ask. So the candle burns, the prayers continue, the faithful die believing, and the galaxy turns, indifferent to meaning, hostile to hope, vast beyond comprehension. In such a universe, survival itself becomes a kind of grace. Endurance becomes its own justification, and faith, whether true or constructed, becomes the only weapon capable of holding back the darkness. Who can truly survive the grim darkness? Perhaps only those who believe survival is possible. Perhaps only those who maintain faith, not because they have proof, but because without faith, there is nothing left but extinction. The Imperium endures because its citizens believe it must. The God Emperor lives because quadrillions pray to him. And meaning exists because humanity refuses to accept meaninglessness, even when meaninglessness is the only honest answer. This chronicle ends as it began, with a question, not answered, not resolved, simply asked and left to echo through the ages. Perhaps that is all any chronicle can do. Bear witness, preserve memory, ask the questions that have no comfortable answers, and trust that somewhere, somewhen, someone will find the courage to look at those questions without flinching. The candle burns, the darkness waits, and between them, humanity endures. If this chronicle found you, if these words reached you across the abyss of time, then you have become its keeper. Bear witness to what was recorded here. Remember those who died believing. Honor those who carried terrible knowledge in perfect silence. And when you face the choice between truth and faith, between honest horror and necessary lie, choose wisely. Choose with full knowledge of what each choice costs.